Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the show, Mr. Andy Dockerty.
Hello. How are you? You good, Ben?
I'm good, thank you, mate. Yeah, how are you doing?
Living the dream, mate.
Living the dream.
As ever.
Aren't we always? Every time we always talk about the dream being lived in the context of it actually going quite badly on things. Are you well anyway? Is everything good?
It's good. Yeah, it's interesting times, but yeah, good.
Yeah, we were talking about how Adlib is undergoing a transition and things, and you're sort of taking a step back from it, or taking a side step from it, or
really,
yeah.
So yeah, in February this year there was the MBO, so the team who have been with me from in some cases 32 years. Promises had made about 25 years ago that at some point I need to move it on, if you like, and it was honouring that alongside. Certainly post-COVID, the whole sector, not just the production end of the industry, but the whole sector really, as we progress, needs to be a lot more commercially minded.
Yeah.
And throughout my whole development of Adlib over 40 years, I've always known that you need to make £1 more than it costs you, but I've never, ever been particularly commercially minded. And the rest of the team, bar John, are all the same. We've all grown up doing gigs, doing shows, and just developing the company, the packaging and everything around it. John, who's the new boy, he's only been there 18 years, is somebody who's part of the team who has come very much from the commercial background. And I think the time was definitely right for John to become MD and move forward and have a much better picture of the commercial element of Adlib as opposed to just the delivery element.
Yeah.
But I think COVID honed a lot of businesses to be more business-like. And that can be as simple as your own terms and conditions.
Definitely.
Do you abide by them? Because we probably never did before. And I think, it's like if somebody's due to pay on a certain date, make sure it's paid. Whereas we'd have probably been a lot more lenient in the past. And I think moving forward, our sector in general needed to be a lot more business-like, because other areas of business that you'd be dealing with would almost be laughing at us because we weren't.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there's so many, analogies with other types of other areas, of business where it's, particularly like the hospitality industry or anything to do with like commercial airlines or anything where everything is paid up front, everything is all dealt with up front and, or subscribed to in some way. So when it does come down to, I mean, even running a bar is just basic, basic economics. But everything in the music industry often seems to me like it's mates rates, or it's after the fact, or it's an IOU or something. So it's interesting that. So well, going back into we were saying. You said 40 years of Adlib. Yeah. So talk to us, take us right back to the start. Where did it start for you, and how did you?
Before that, it started when I was about 15, when I was at school, and a friend of mine was a drummer in a band, and we were getting on. We played in the same footy team. She said, "Do you want to come along and watch me band tonight? We're playing around the corner, somewhere local." So I went along and I just watched it and got lost in the camaraderie of it, in the sort of, I was bitten first time basically, and I to this day am the most musically talentless person you are ever going to meet in your life, ever. Never ever wanted to be on the stage, no interest in that end, but wound up getting involved because I then started like moving the gear around for them, then doing a little bit of sound for them. And the guy in question is a guy who is to this day one of probably the world's best session drummers, based back in Liverpool now, and a guy called Roy Martin.
Oh yeah, and we were talking about Roy, Yes.
And Roy, he did the thing at 19 that he played in local bands from when he was like 15 through to 19 in Liverpool bands. For those, I don't suppose there's anyone old enough to watch your podcast in here, but he was in a band called Sneaks, and then he went to a band called Motion Pictures, and then at 19 he completely bypassed the London thing and went straight lived in New York. And struggled for a couple of years, and through meeting a producer out there who really liked his style, wound up playing on an Aretha Franklin track.
Wow.
That then opened up a whole lot of doors for him. And then he wound up, he came back home forever ago, but had that stint out there which helped set him up.
Right,
So
right.
that's how originally I started. Went along, did gigs with them. They were all really, really clever, and they all went to university and stuff like that. I was working with them from when I was old-fashioned fifth year, which would have been 15, 16. Did my O-levels, then I did the first year, which was the lower six back in the day,
Right.
of A-levels, and flunked miserably to the point where it was like, I've either got to really knuckle down and do this, or I need to go and get a job.
Yeah.
So I was working with the band for a few evenings in the week, and then wound up applying for a couple of jobs. I would 2 successful applications. One was for an administrative role in the local authorities. The second one, which I took obviously, was an apprentice electrician. And the reason I took that was because I knew that was going to help the band in the evening and so on and so forth.
Right.
So I became the only one working. They had bits of gear. So I started buying bits of gear that complemented what they had, and then did that for a fair few years. Owned a bit of PA, started working with other bands. And then when I got to 23, I got made redundant from the electrician's job. So fully qualified spark by then. And then at that time, which was now 1984, the government were running one of these enterprise allowance schemes, which gave you £40 a week for a year to help you set up a business.
Wow.
which is what I jumped on and what I did. And then it kind of started from there.
Right, right. And so obviously the initial business idea was all about, something to do with music
it was being in that environment and mixing bands. And then what I wound up getting at that point, within about a year or so, was a couple of local venue residencies.
Right. That's what. I was going to ask how it got. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what is now the restaurant on the corner of Seal Street and Slater Street. Used to be called.
Know?
Yeah. I'll get there in a minute. Wreckfish used to be.
Wreckfish.
It's now called Wreck. They've dropped the fish.
Right.
That place back in 1984 was a venue, and the venue was on the top floor.
Right.
That was a Wednesday night. That was my first residency. And then there was a place called The System up the back of Temple Street. That was a Thursday night. And then started doing, not long after that, Stairways, which was a rock club in Birkenhead. So it was all the club stuff. And
you were just you were providing the gear for those clubs and things, and mixing and stuff.
Yeah. So it was like really tatty gear. Obviously,
rabbit hutches all glued together.
An ottoman for the cables case and all this kind of stuff. It was pretty comedy stuff, yeah. And then it just sort of like kind of grew and grew from there. Late 80s, started mixing a couple of bands that wasn't just with my PA, so they were doing club tours and so on and so forth. Particular band at that time, 2 things I did in that year actually. One was a band called 16 Tambourines back in the day, who had an arena tour supporting Wet, Wet, Wet.
Oh, wow.
So that was the first time I was only doing the support band of doing anything of that magnitude. And at the same time, or just after that, a Liverpool band called The Real People, who are still going now.
They're still going, yeah.
Pretty much wrote the first 3 Oasis albums and. And this whole Oasis thing at the minute just brings back the memories of watching Noel and Liam staring at Chris and Tony, because they're, again, a pair of brothers out there, The Real People. And just seeing how they made decisions to sign to major labels when it wasn't cool to be on a major label, because they were signed to Columbia.
Right.
And then, of course, Oasis was signed and were credible because it was all the independent stuff.
Yeah,
as well.
of course.
And to see the 2 journeys go like that was terrible, because there's so much of their stuff that is massively influenced in Oasis stuff. And that's why, there was a court case, there was an out-of-court settlement, and that is why the 4th Oasis album was more of a concept album, because they couldn't nick any more of the really songs.
Interesting. So during that period then, you were obviously supplying tech and gear and things like that. Did you start to acquire staff and things as well at that point?
Yeah, so even from the beginning, you couldn't really
grew.
do a gig on your own. So in 1985, I did a local rock covers band with a couple of tracks of their own called Hooker. I met a guy called Chris Leckie while I was doing that. You'll probably know Chris, sound engineer to the stars these days. Brilliant engineer. He basically was the guitarist in the band. He'd hired us to do this gig, got involved, and he started doing most of the gigs after that with me when he wasn't playing with his band. Then eventually he became a successful engineer in his own right and has been touring the world ever since. Back in that day, I think the first thing he got was a band called Therapy. He was actually mixing Texas before I did Texas, so I picked that up.
And Texas became a massive show for you, didn't it? It became like a regular.
Yeah, I did every live show from '93 all the way up to probably about 9 or 10 years ago, where I couldn't spin the plates anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah, and you know, she is a phenomenal singer.
Yeah,
phenomenal.
And you could tell that from the recent Glastonbury set that they did. I mean, it was just really obvious. You know, she clearly knows what she's doing.
As a sound engineer, like gain, high pass filter, push the fader up. Yeah, maybe a bit of compression, but other than that, don't do anything, because all you're going to do is make it worse. And for such a tiny girl, the amount of low end and energy and power that's in that voice is incredible.
So, you know, you were talking about, you know, gain, compression, all these things. You know, these clearly are like academic technical terms. And for anyone watching who's not familiar with any of those things, how did you come to learn all that stuff? And was it just on the job, and was
self-taught?
Yeah, self-taught.
Well, when you say it was self-taught, but it was by being in situations when you're a support band and looking what other engineers were doing, and never ever being shy to ask a question. And the one thing I see with it, because I do a lot of teaching today now, and if you've got a group of youngsters in front of you, you can generally tell that somebody's bursting to ask a question but can't, because doesn't want to ask that question in front of their peers, in
front of their friends.
So in my mind, I'll try and do my best to make sure I ask the silly questions, because there's no such thing as a silly question.
Yeah, of course.
And again, that's how I handled myself with other engineers in the past, and that's how you learn a load of stuff.
Definitely.
You know, you'd have your own theory, and then you'd either have that confirmed, or you go, "Oh right, I actually need to go back to the drawing board here and have another go."
Yeah. So in you know, throughout the journey, you know, I'm guessing that you know, essentially, you know, it's just gone from strength to strength to strength, all the way up to getting you know, gigs with Texas and gigs with and now we were talking about Sam Fender. Can you just reiterate what was going on with
the Sam Fender tour? I mean, Sam, we looked after on his smaller shows just before the COVID thing happened,
right?
And he was a hot property then, a hot ticket then, but it never really happened for him. And he was the last person actually to cancel prior to when COVID broke. Everyone was cancelling weeks and weeks and weeks, you know, as it was going into it. But he was the last one, because he was still desperate to get his tour
out and do the tour, right?
And that was simply because he'd had some health issues and pulled a few tours beforehand. So he was desperate, because it was like, you know, he needed to.
I really need to get out. Yeah.
So, but to be fair, he was incredibly loyal when it all came back, or him and his team. So the Sam Fender thing, we did the big homecoming gig for him at Newcastle, the footy ground. And I don't know if there's quite a lot of footage of like this 1 minute sizzle that Brad from our place put together for him, of just a few pre-gig shots and then a few shots on it, which will lead into bigger things that Sam's done. But no, his tour was confirmed for us for all the disciplines, which is obviously audio, lighting, rigging, video, camera systems. Will all be coming out of Liverpool for that. So one to be proud of, to be
absolutely
fair.
It's huge. It's absolutely huge. So that progression from like doing, you know, sound in a bar to all the way up to, you know, manning a Sam Fender tour with all the disciplines, like you said. How did you know? Is it about networking and collaborating with people that got, you know? Did you have to learn how to do lighting yourself and sound and you know, put on a dress and do whatever it is? You know,
I'm pretty much clueless on everything these days, to be honest. I was pretty on technology, certainly audio technology, up to where we went from analog, like proper audio gear, to the nonsense we've got. To the digital stuff we've got today. I mean, and I'll justify that by saying digital is still a simulation of analog. And until such time there's no latency, it gets that fast, there's always going to be problems with digital audio. And the fundamental job of taking a microphone, sticking it into a mixing desk and bringing it out, forget all your plugins, forget all your gates, your compressors, but the job of a desk to take a microphone in and spit it out to a mix bus of any type you want to mention, left, right, monitor, whatever. No digital desk, no matter whether you're spending 150 grand, which we do on some of the ones we've got, sounds as good as most or any analog console.
Right.
Because it just doesn't.
Yeah.
But you can do an arena tour on a desk this big, whereas I'd have had desks the size of this room.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Rack over here with a load of gubbins in.
I bet some of them 80s photographs are incredible. I mean, it's like an invasion of the Daleks.
And of course, now your promoters love the fact that everything can be on something. Big.
Well, a band does as well. You know, a band loves anything that can just fit in a van, as opposed to 20 buses and stuff. You know,
certainly a complex band that want to tour their own monitor system with the in-ear stuff. Now as well, and some of the new in-ear stuff that we've just invested in. You've got 32 channels in one unit for odd in-ear monitor mixes, which is just ridiculous.
Unbelievable, yeah.
Outrageously expensive, but again, a lot of the manufacturers now are having to so this is where digital is really good in how they've managed to be able to get the amount of frequencies that we need within the bands that we are permitted as a sector, because obviously government keeps selling off all the air that they own, apparently. So we're getting increasingly limited in the bandwidth that we've got. You know, if you go back to something like 2012, before deregulation, you could have a radio system and use it anywhere around the country. Now, I know there are still systems you can use, and they'd be, if you like, it'd be very difficult for a pro tour to be using them, because everybody who's using free licenses are fighting for the same band.
Of course.
So we're doing everything that's within the other bands that you have to buy. So, you know, an average tour's probably got 20 radio systems on it, at least, as a bare minimum. So you've got to register every frequency every day for every town that you're in, and it moves what frequencies are available around the country.
Wow.
So not only have you got to register for what the day and the town that you're in, the team on site have to retune everything on a daily basis to be the frequencies that you've got allocated for the town.
Wow, that's insane.
And of course, you have to pay for those licenses as well, for every license, for every day, for every town that you're in. So again, you know, one of the things that happens in the background that people don't necessarily appreciate. But but moving forward with the radio stuff, the fact that you can now get so many bands in such a narrow slots, which you couldn't do before because of interference, they'd have all overlap. And there's all of the big players are just coming out with these things like right now. We bought one of the first systems that's come over from America from a company called Outline, something like that. I told you I haven't got my finger on the pulse these days. And that went straight in and did Coldplay at Glastonbury. Because the RF that was required, the systems in place weren't capable of handling can you imagine the amount of RF that's flying around Glastonbury? Because it's not just the main stage.
Of course. It's the whole site.
This was one of the few units that could be tuned to certain frequencies that would do it. So we got the first ones in the UK.
Wow.
So that was good. And I think that will change a little bit about how bands tour radio systems, because they're going to be tiny now.
Yeah, of course. Well, technology has just had such an impact, not only on the way it's played live, you know, music is played live, but obviously the way people create music as well. And that whole songwriting process is even down to just the fact that a kid can get a laptop, get on Logic and just start tinkering and create something that's really pretty good and release it. Is like, that's absolutely incredible and unbelievable and terrifying, and it's a lot of things, isn't it?
It amazes me because I'm old enough to remember, and Cy Denny we were talking about before, he'll remember this obviously, but there's a Liverpool engineer called Keith Andrews up at when it was Amazon,
right?
Simmonswood by Kirby, and Keith, I remember going in regularly. He was a really good mate of mine. And he was still doing everything that was on the 2-inch reels.
Wow.
And when one wanted to do edit and say, right, we're going to take a chorus out now, it'd be just like, you'd hear the bass drum bit, put a line in it there, chop that, feed it through, count the bars through, get to the end of the chorus,
no way.
Chop it, and then splice it.
Yeah,
bit of taping, run it through, perfect.
Whereas now,
and that's the way it's
Tools.
just like click, drag, go.
Done.
Honestly, but the skill set that was involved in doing all that,
I can imagine.
Do you want to put the chorus back in? Right, okay. Cool. Yeah, just make sure you get it the right way around. But again, so how that technology's improved, as you say, for the songwriter at home is incredible. You can do anything now.
That's it. So, bringing all these elements together, like the technology's improved, not only just the live sound, but the writing process and things. There's so much for, a techie, a roadie, a guitarist, a musician to learn about and to understand about just putting on a live show. I know we've talked about this. There's that video. If you can say what the name of the link is to that video as well.
Yeah, it's on YouTube. It's liveevents.careers, and it's a video that we put together. It shows 180 different roles that are involved, from an incoming phone call to a production company to the delivery of a show.
So this is what I want to talk about. Yeah, off the top of your head, how what is the general process for, I've got a band, I'd like to put it on tour, please. I ring Adlib and I have maybe a bit of budget. What happens from that point?
Well, it's unlikely that the band are going to be calling us in the first place, to be honest, because normally what happens is they go through, the band have done the album, then they'll go through a design process with a design team. They'll work out what a show is going to look like. They'll appoint a tour manager or a production manager. They will get this. Then they will go out to companies like Adlib to tender for the job. So we will get the first point of call generally from a tour manager or a production manager. There's various different ways they come in. But if it's a band, really direct from a band, it will generally be through their representatives. And then we basically get the show design through, and we will then work out how that show can be delivered, i.e. how big is it, how many lights are on it, what's the fixtures, what's the truss, how many motors are involved, where's the cable management going, what PA is going to go on it, how big are the venues, what do we need to put in there,
the frequencies,
booking the RF.
Yeah.
So to put the quote together, you need to understand how the show's going to be done.
Yeah.
So at that point, you're still doing all your CAD drawings. You're still working out how many motors are going to be needed to pick up the 20 trusses that might be on the tour, for argument's sake. So it's a complex, you're speaking to so many different people just to get the quote. Once the quote's together, that will go back to the client. They'll look at it, yes or no, generally tweaking, haggling, how much? I want to rent it, not buy it. And again, there's a lack of appreciation these days of the value of the kit.
Yeah.
As I'm sure everybody in here will testify to.
Yeah.
People don't realise how much the stuff is. So,
of course.
And then once the quote's in, and it's been accepted, if you like, then you go through the whole process of getting all the drawings in place, which, again, you've got to, people don't realise when we're looking at any arena in the UK. So we've got CAD drawings, which is the if you like, the specification of every venue.
Is that an acronym? CAD?
So it's a computer-aided design drawing of all of the venues in the UK and Europe. So when we're looking at the designs, we'll know in advance whether they're going to fit in a lot of these places. Because a lot of the American artists we have coming over, when they send their designs through, it's like, mate, that's not going to fit in the building.
Wow.
It'll be fine. Well, it will be if you knock that wall out. But other than that, and then also, a lot of the time, there might be 2 or 3. So on an arena tour, you quite regularly go into Bournemouth or Brighton, which is sort of hybrid arena / big theatre.
/ big theatre, yeah.
So I know you've done them quite a few times. So the problem you've got there is the show that's big enough for the arenas is too big for those venues. So what are you stripping out? How are you stripping it down?
Yeah.
How are you going to do it? And then it's a recabling job and a rethink job. But ultimately, if it's a proper arena tour, you've got the design that fits into the smallest tour, and that rolls itself in and out on a daily basis. But again, from a punter's point of view, they've got no idea that happens. They turn up, watch the band, they think all that stuff's just there. And then the roadie fairies come in and get it and put it back up the following day.
But I think not just the punter though. From what we were talking about this earlier, from what I see when I do artist development stuff, the artists themselves have no idea that that's what goes into a live show, and that mentality of when you're gigging in the pub, I just take my guitar and someone plugs it in and it's just there and it happens. And, great. I think they think on some level it's like, well, it's just that, but more people, isn't it? And it's like, whoa.
And again, once you've got that through, the amount of prep time in the warehouse, then making sure, all your pre-rig, all your light fixtures is all labeled, everything's addressed. So there's a whole load of processes. The audio files will be getting loaded in. You'll be working out how many inputs you got, where the stage boxes are going to live, how it'll work within the set a lot of the time as well. Eventually then you're on your trucks and you're into your production rehearsals. At that point, you've got the whole load of other teams coming in, which will be, if you think about it, it's not just about the creative. It's all about this. I think, as I say, we list 180 different roles, and it goes from system technicians to lighting designers to audio system technicians to video guys to the operators to the designers, right the way down the line to, if you're on a venue, the accountants, music accountants, to the specialist industry. It's what we're saying in the industry is it's aimed at 11 and 12-year-olds, because our industry, on our side of it, it's invisible. It's completely invisible. Young people get to find out about it if they have relatives in it, or when they're 16 or 17 and they don't really know what they want to do as careers, and somebody will say, "Do you like music?
Do music, it's easy."
Do you want to, I don't play, you don't want to play. Well, what you need to be is a sound engineer then. And you can tour the world with bands. Doesn't that sound great? Fabulous. 27 grand later and a degree that nobody recognises. It's brilliant, So in my mind, it's very much, we need younger people to be excited by the industry, to want to go, I enjoyed that bit about, I'll use my background, audio systems, that looked really interesting. And then we've backed it up with documents like, well, if you're 11 and 12, when your subjects come along, do physics, do maths, do this, do that, because that will help you when you get to 15 and 16.
And you want to,
if you want to go into it. But the most successful people we have coming into it are youngsters who are young, who are aware of the industry,
right,
and come and do a week's work experience at 14. Right. And then they're buying into
have their heads blown.
As soon as they're 16, they're in on various different things, and they fly. But there's an ignorance. It goes back to the ignorance of what the industry actually is,
right?
Which is what the video gives you the hint of what it actually is.
All those 180 jobs plus. I mean, we haven't even gotten to like the caterers, the accountants, it's everything.
First
isn't it?
aid people in the venue are
that's
listed.
First aid,
merch people, bar staff. They're all in there.
Where does the PPE come from? It's everything. Isn't it? It's unbelievable. Yeah.
Well, health and safety's in there as well.
God.
Yeah. And everybody's favorite.
Everybody just winced then.
Yeah.
So with all that in mind, there's you were talking about like the deficit in the industry is the fact that a lot of young people kind of don't really know about it. They all they see is Sabrina Carpenter doing a Boss show, and they think, all right, I want to be Sabrina Carpenter. Yeah. And that's kind of it. And that's all they know about what the industry is, apart from, the obvious. Everyone wants to be the cool guitarist. Yeah. Everyone wants to be maybe the techie
can't
or something
all be
like
you,
that.
Can you, mate?
Well, they can't, mate. There's only one me, but there's, they all, a lot of the industry is invisible, as you said. Could you talk about the, it's like an educational program that Adlib runs, or it's a. Could you mention that?
For our staff, we do our own in-house training,
right?
And that is just about. To start with, it's about professionalism, and I generally always do the first one, which is the most boring session that's done, because I can do a 10-minute talk on a microphone stand. Absolutely riveting.
I love that.
But the point of it is how important that microphone stand is in the middle of a show if you haven't tightened the nut properly, and there's a singer playing with the guitar who can't tighten it, and you're in front of 50,000 people. I'm sending you on stage to fix that in front of the 50,000 people, so make sure it's not you.
Yeah.
So, it's that as well. And also, what are the rubber feet for on a mic stand? Because most people say to stop it sliding. No, that's a byproduct. It's to stop the vibrations coming through the stage and up and into the microphone. And, so there's a whole load of basic labeling cables properly.
Oh, man.
Labeling stage
coiling cables.
Coiling cables. Running cables out properly where you put the slack. Pick the right length cable for the job that you're doing. So there's a lot of really boring stuff I do. And then I go into a lot to do with, if you're in smaller venues, how to voice up a PA system in a smaller venue without the aid of smart or without the aid of the digital tools that you have when you get to the bigger venues that you may have. And the same about, if you've got a venue, we spoke about in-ear monitoring a lot before, but again, most club levels are still running off wedges and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then understanding about a lot of audio around the simplicity of speaker placement, how things work. The biggest thing that's missed by a lot of young engineers coming in is the fact that most of them have come through a recording background first.
Right. Interesting.
So going back to the point I made earlier about what do you want to do, I don't really know. A lot of people will then be sent to recording
studios,
degrees.
right? So go and make the tea in a studio and learn it.
And go and get,
interesting.
But not so much working in the studios, going to do a 3-year course in recording, which is great. And, there's 12 in Liverpool.
There's a lot.
There's 12. Because courses I'm talking about, not studios, I'm talking about courses. Right. So from Liverpool Uni to Lipper to the community college, and then if you go into the Liverpool City region, it's all around the things. So there's about 12, and they're all producing 10, 20 recording engineers with
courses
degrees,
and engineers
at the end of each year. If you multiply that by the country, there's tens of thousands of people coming out with a recording degree. Yet there's only one or
jobs.
2 studios that actually employ people, because the majority of them are owner-run.
Right.
So why have you produced 20, 30,000 people for jobs that simply don't exist? Because they don't know what we need.
That's
Hence
a great
the video.
point. Yeah, that's
so
a great
what happens
point.
Then is you've got all these young people with all their debt who wanted to work in recording studios and then think, oh, do you know what? I'll go and do live then, because that's audio. Right. The analogy I give at this point is, when I was at school, for the first 2 years of school, I did science, and then science becomes physics, chemistry, and biology. If we just look at our sector and we just look at audio as an example, we've got audio, we've got live, we've got theatre, and we've got studio. Each one of those is as far removed from each other as a discipline as physics, chemistry and biology is.
Yeah.
So you can't just go from there to there for many, many reasons. And like anything in life, whoever teaches you something first is the people that you believe in. So when I've got the amount of young people who will eventually wind up in Adlib, the ones who've got the recording degrees are the ones that take much, much longer to get through. They've got the desire and they've got the passion, but you've almost got to take away what they know from a recording
perspective. They've got to unlearn the
to be able to teach them what they need as a live perspective.
Right.
And the most fundamental, obvious difference is we've got a lot of microphones on all the time. You're not listening to anything in isolation.
Yeah.
So, the amount of people who are coming out with a degree who'll start a sound check, let's just assume all the PA's voiced up and all the monitors are voiced up, and I'll come back to some bits on that in a bit, but they will start with the bass drum.
Right.
Why? Why? Because what you have to realize is you need to get anything that is going to hear everything on first. So you need to get all your vocals voiced, both front of house and on stage, and leave them on. Then if you've got brass, you need to do the same with that. And then if you've got percussion, you need to do the same with that. Even guitar mics, if you're not even listening to the guitar yet, just get your high and your low pass filters right and push the faders up. Get your gain roughly where it's going to be. It mightn't be exact. So all the ambient microphones are on. They are going to hear predominantly what's in front of them, but they're also going to hear absolutely everything else.
Yeah.
So then when you get to, and before you do anything, make sure you've had some form of control over where the band put the backline. Space that as best you can for the best benefit. Everything is about space. Everything is about pushing stuff as far away from each other to give yourself as much isolation as you possibly can. So once you've established that, once you've then done all the ambient stuff, when you get to your drum kit, do the overheads first, do your ride, do your crashes, do your hi-hats. And before you even listen to the bass drum mic, get the drummer to hit the bass drum and listen to what you can hear through all those ambient microphones. And
without
then,
even turning it on, yeah.
And then when you put the bass drum mic up, that's what your bass drum's going to sound like. Not pure and empty with just one microphone on it.
That's it. It's about prioritizing the...
Yeah, so what happens then is, when you do your sound check that way, which might take a little bit longer, but when you do it that way, everything's catered for. So when you push your stuff up to mix, it's pretty much there. The reason you see so many people doing 4 and 5 songs is what they're trying to do is without realizing, it's the fact that everything's now all on together. You haven't factored that in.
Yeah.
So when you see people messing around for hours, it's all generally, not always, but generally because everything's now on at the same time, and you've not allowed for that anymore.
Yeah, of course. And as soon as you got like 10, 20, 30 mics all coming on, and and you haven't factored that in. You're forever just battling it, aren't you, with feedback and so on,
Yeah.
and everything.
So
interesting. Wow.
That's the first thing. It's like you can't do everything in isolation because it's just not relevant. But that goes against the grain if you've got a recording background where you're doing stuff pure, because live is also its own huge compromise. Nothing in live is pure. It's just what is the best compromise to get where I need to get to.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. That's so, in terms of developing future sound engineers and things at Adlib, that's like kind of part of the education that they receive, is like actually, I mean, because I remember when going around the warehouse, you've got a specific room, haven't you, in Adlib that's for
exactly for that,
and testing shows and things like that. I mean, how would if someone was interested in becoming a part of that, or learning more about it or wherever, like, what would they do? Who would they speak to? How would they apply? How would they,
I mean, literally just send an email into Adlib, and it gets picked up. Everything comes in via a thing called HubSpot. I don't know what that is, but ultimately it comes into us. Anyone who makes any kind of inquiries, it comes into the office, and we all see all the inquiries that come in, whether it be about people looking for roles or general inquiries. So just email Adlib. If you go to the Adlib website, you'll find all the relevant information there.
Okay, great. What kind of tips then, because it's clearly been, it's 40 years of building. What kind of tips and tricks do you think do you have for, like, kind of like looking after yourself? Because you must have been through hard times with it all. There must be expectations and things that you go, this is going to work. Oh, it didn't. Oh, that show is going to be great. Oh, no, it wasn't. Do you have any kind of rules to live by, or anything that's like,
I mean, not so much on that side, because it's very much, it is what it is.
Right.
I think, for me, there's been some really tough times through there. And that just helps what builds the character. You sometimes have to knuckle down. You sometimes have to maybe rotate stuff you didn't want to rotate at a period of time just to raise funds for a moment. But, that's a long time ago kind of thing.
Yeah.
And, so there were significant things I did within the business that changed the business's trajectory in some respects.
Of course, at a legislative level, it's this.
So I think, one of the things going back was I only ever bought what we could afford to buy, which means you're on a very, very slow process. And then a point came where I thought there was just about enough behind us to be able to then go and start leasing things. And once we started that, that's when the growth curve starts to happen. And I think along the way, the growth of the business, is it's you never know the next phone call in this industry, whether that be you or me or whatever. And you've always got to be ready to adapt and have conviction within that. So one of the biggest sort of Adlib stories around that was in 2002. We looked after a band called the Eels, who are still gigging now.
Right, yeah.
And that was just like a local, it wasn't local, I'm lying. It was a UK sort of university, small theatre type tour. And their sound engineer, American band, obviously, the sound engineer was an American guy called Pete Kepler. And when they did Liverpool Uni, the Mountford, I went down, met Pete. We got on incredibly well, had a lot of the same ethos about professionalism in the industry, all that kind of stuff. And he was a phenomenal engineer, which is unusual for an American. I didn't say that out loud. Phenomenal engineer. And we stayed in touch a little bit. 6 months later, I got a phone call off him. How are you doing? Yeah, good, really good, Pete. What's up? I said, I'd like you to do a tour for us. Who have you got? I've just landed the David Bowie tour.
Wow.
Okay, that'll be fine, and that was one of those tours that it was his last tour. It was the reality tour.
Oh, wow,
And we did audio on that because the lighting and the video was just developing at that time, if you like. So we did audio on that through the whole of the UK and Europe as well. And that was one of those tours where, I think it earned us at the time, this would have been 2003.
Wow.
It would have earned us at the time about 80 grand, and it probably cost us 400 grand.
I can imagine.
On top of what we already had, even back then, to just get enough stuff in to do it. But the faith he had in us doing it all came from the beliefs and the conversation that you'd had before. And that's why, no matter where you are in business, it doesn't matter who you're talking to or what you're talking to, always respect them, because you never know where they're going to be and what they're doing.
You never
next,
know who people are, who they
Yeah.
know, who they've talked to, where they've come from. There's so much, isn't there?
Well, off the back of when he did that, we did 9 Inch Nails for him.
Right,
We wound up
right.
doing that tour for a long period of time. And who he's doing now, he's on Broadway now, this guy, Pete, doing all the David Byrne stuff. So
Oh,
he did the
wow.
last David Byrne tour that came through the UK.
Wow.
Which was that one where they had nothing. This was, again, the development of RF, to be honest, because David Byrne had an idea for this tour 20 years ago. So it was about 2019, I think he came through. For 20 years before that. But again, you couldn't get enough frequencies together to do it. And it's the tour he's done, which is now a TV show and a documentary and still on Broadway, where it's a completely open stage. It's just chainmail. The drum kit is made up of 3 people, and there's 8 of them in the band, all doing the dance routines and moving around the stage
Wow.
to the songs that they're playing,
Wow.
all on RF. But to make it more difficult, of course, because it's a chainmail set, you can't get the RF through, so all the RFs in the lighting trusses, all the transmitters and receivers pointing down. But again, a phenomenal engineer.
Yeah, wow, bloody hell. Does Adlib do anything to do with social media, and does it get involved in social?
We've got our team. There's a team headed up, we call it Kino, which sits in the Adlib umbrella, and that's headed up by Brad.
Brad, yeah, we met, didn't we?
Yeah.
We were talking to Calvin before about that.
Yeah, and Brad's been absolutely brilliant at doing. I mean, I'm not particularly a social media kind of watcher or doer or anything like that. It's too digital for me. If it was analog, I'm not really.
If it was a carrier pigeon, go and like someone.
Cool. I think that's been brilliant for us, and the way Brad tells the story as well, because it's Brad who put that video together.
Right,
is brilliant. So that's something that came through the whole lockdown thing. So obviously, our industry completely shut down. The only things we could do were some live
Zoom
broadcast gigs,
like Zoom concerts, that kind of thing.
We were doing some stuff down in Brixton that was going out live in London.
In the academy? In the academy.
And a few other bits and pieces, but it was the only thing we could do. So there was a few other bits happening. We'd met Brad, who had been making some promotional films for some speaker manufacturers. We knew him through a few other routes as well. And he came and ran and directed a thing in Liverpool called the International Business Festival.
Yeah.
So that was one of our jobs that we'd done. And that was one of, although we had stuff like that, we never really had met someone who would produce it and do all that kind of stuff, which Brad came in and did. And then off the back of that, we just got on famously with him, and he became a full-time member of the team, which is growing and growing. And that's helped us do all the content stuff that we now do.
Right.
And whether that be for artists or whether it be for other elements of what we do, we've done some films for local authorities, but it's mainly around music and music artists, blogs and stuff like that. So, but that's something that came out of COVID.
Right, a good thing that came out of COVID.
One of the 2 good things that came out of COVID. Yeah.
And we were talking about how hard it was earlier when we were during the pandemic, and like because the whole industry just crashed, didn't it? Essentially, and just completely stood still. I know myself, it was a particularly hairy time where it was, oh my God, what do we do now? And they were releasing commercials saying Fatima used to be a ballet dancer, now she's become a barista or something. They were doing all this like retraining stuff. And I kept saying to students at the time that I found all that sort of marketing spiel kind of not offensive, but kind of inaccurate, because I said, like, look, anyone who I know who's in the arts or media creative industry at all, they're all doing the coffee jobs, the dancers, the drivers, they're driving, they're doing, everyone's doing, 10 things at once to try to make it work and to make it succeed. And it sounds like it's a similar thing for you in the beginning, where you were just trying to, get bits of PA, get bits of gear, and that's what everyone does, isn't it? Until you make it, until you get it.
The COVID thing was it was horrific, and it's where it proved that our industry is invisible. And it also proved that any government is only genuinely interested in money.
Yeah.
And what happened was, because I got heavily involved, I was one of the instigators of that We Make Events team, which was the backbone of that is Plaza. So Plaza is that Professional Light and Sound Association, which I'm now since vice chair of. But what came out of that was the fact that I remember clearly watching ITN News, the flight case push that happened in Manchester. We had all the crew pushing cases up the street in Manchester.
Yes.
I know, and a load of the Adlib team were there, and it was just something for the mental health, I suppose, for anyone in our industry to just go and do something be seen.
Yeah.
Which was amazing. However, I just sat there looking at it and going, this is a disaster. And the reason I thought it was a disaster was simply because if you could imagine yourself in 10 Downing Street with your wine and your cheese and all your mates, because you've realised that's the antidote at this point. So they're all around with the wine. I'm looking at like, what are all these people wearing black pushing cases? What kind of industry is that? Why would you support that?
Yeah.
And it was the following day that all these unviable comments started flying around.
Yeah.
After that, and I thought,
interesting.
Right, we need to do something about this. So straight away, I got in touch with a couple of the big businesses in our sector, found out that they were, well, two of the big ones in particular. One is a company called Audiotonics. Audiotonics owns Digico, Allen & Heath, Calrec, Cadec, Clang, Outboard, numerous worldwide brands, are a UK company. And most of those consoles are actually manufactured in the UK. So Audiotonics was the first one. At that point, they were about $250 million turnover, significantly more now. And then another company I spoke to was a company called White Light, which are a London-based lighting company that were about a 40 million turnover company that were based, that do most of their work in the West End. They've got all the West End productions. Discovered both of them were HSBC accounts. We were HSBC account. And spoke to our manager. One of our financial advisors was our ex-manager, so spoke to him as well. Very, very quickly, within about 2 weeks of talking, going up and up the ladder at HSBC, we were talking to a lady at the time, she's since moved on, called Jane Galvin, who was head of commercial banking for HSBC. We put together a whole load of presentations that we went to the bank and their key people with, which was around environmental sustainability, all this kind of stuff. We put a big sort of like return on investment thing together. We did a whole presentation to the bank, and they were absolutely blown away to the point where even when you could only have 6 people in the places, they came to Adlib at the time and had a meeting with us there. Off the back of that, they are one of the bodies that introduced us to the body called the CBI. The CBI is the organisation that basically recommends to government what businesses are asking for. So the CBI then are going to government, hang on a minute, you need to have a look at this. And one of the this is really boring, this next bit, but actually it tells the story. One of the things that's been discovered and what we're asking people to do now is there's a thing that you've signed off on that you probably don't even know, and the guys in here will be signing off on it and they don't even know. But when you surrender your tax at the end of the year, you sign it off to a code. This code is called a SIC code or a SOC code, SIC or SOC, right? When I was first asked to do that, didn't know what it was, didn't know what it went, and you just look at a number that is kind of relevant and a code that looks kind of relevant. Brilliant. We all do that, right? What happens is, or what happened was, there's no coincidence that the building trade were back on site within 4 weeks, because when the building trade sign off, they sign off across 2 or 3 different numbers, the construction industry, right? So when something like this happens, government go, look at the numbers, 3 numbers, trillions of pounds, we've got to do something there. We've got to get them back in. So, you know, within 4 weeks, there was protocol on building sites, there was this, there was the other, and the sites were open again. Our world, right, you go through all the things you could be. We're not there, other, click other, opens up 300 or 400 things we could be. So our sector was spread over 300 or 400 different things that we all think we might have been. So consequently, you know, we're not £1 million business. We're not a £500 million business. We're not the £84 billion sector that we are, right? because it's not recognised as that, because we're spread over all these different SEC codes and SOC codes. So now, one of the missions at the minute is, it doesn't matter where you are in business, if we get everyone to sign off to the code 90020, that is support of the performing arts. So it doesn't matter where you are or what you're doing, that's what you're doing.
Interesting.
Right? So if we get everyone on a 90020 code, all of a sudden our profile as a size of sector grows and grows and grows. And whether you like it or not, the bigger you are and the bigger you're seen to be, the more likely you're going to get listened to and supported.
Of course.
So I still feel that the creatives across the board get, Britain's brilliant at that. It's fabulous. Have a little pat on the head and here you go, you can have something, versus, pardon my terminology, fuck me, is that sector that big? We really need to start investing properly in that.
Yeah.
So that is something that I think, we need to represent. What came out of COVID is we're so fragmented as a sector.
Yeah, completely.
It was described to me as like, if you were in aviation or if you were in the car industry, they all went to fight their governments in battleships. We turned up in 1,000 canoes.
Yeah.
And it's
that's a great analogy.
No chance. You've got no chance.
Yeah.
So, as a sector, as a business in general, we've got to be a little bit more joined at the hip to be able to get listened to.
Do you think it's to do with the fact that there's so, we were talking about the 180 something disciplines with that join the sector. Is it about redefining those?
It's more about identifying them as part of the same sector.
As part of the same thing, right?
It's just recognizing its value. We're not recognized. It's I think I described it in that initial mail that I sent. I've never ever done any social media but one mail that I put up at the beginning of it all. And in that I said we're undervalued and invisible. And as a sector, we have to be much, much better than that. And I think moving forward and progressing, it's not about being embarrassed to say who we are and what we are, because we're pretty important.
Quite right.
And even if you just look, if it wasn't for broadcast, then the government couldn't say or do anything. That's part of what we all do.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that is taken for granted that I don't really think should be.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what can be done? A person hearing this, is there anything that they can do to support this? Cause, whatever you want to call it.
Be aware of it, really, and encourage people to have a look at what, when they're putting their tax returns in, change the code to 90020, because, as I say, the more people that do that, within the Plaza hat that I have on, we're really trying to hit every business to make sure they do. And I think there's been an increase of 32% from where it was who've gone to it, but we still got to get that message out there. But that's for everybody.
Of course.
That's everyone will benefit if we're regarded a bit of a bigger sector, to be fair.
That's, I suppose, the benefits of gigs, podcasts, trying to tell people, because I had no idea about that. I don't know if anybody in here had any idea.
Like I say, it's a proper boring subject, and they've stayed awake as well.
No, they're all awake. They're all here. They're with us. All right then. So just to kind of like bring it home, if I'm a kind of, I'm 16, I know I'm good at fixing things. I know I'm interested in science. I know I like music and all that kind of stuff. And I would like to be the next Andy Dockerty. I would like to, I want to maybe join Adlib, or I want to set up my own company, or I want to do those things. Do you have any like tips, bits of advice, anything at all that would help them out?
I would suggest that I think most people who come into this sector, if the passion is true, if there's enough passion and desire, and there's two things you need in this. You need to have an amount of technical ability, and you need to be not afraid of asking questions and not afraid of learning. You've got to be humble. The most successful people in this, there's a couple of people out there who are really loud and really big. They don't last very long, or they haven't got a great reputation. Be humble. It's a combination of your skills and who you are as a person. Mm-hmm. It's imperative, so if the touring world is for you, education won't necessarily tell you that if you're touring and you're putting a speaker system in on a daily basis, you're probably doing an 18-hour day, 4 or 5 days back to back, by the way. Or if you're doing festivals, you definitely are. If I've got someone who's interested in front of me, I'll spend them 25 minutes telling them how rubbish the industry is and why they shouldn't do it. and then 5 minutes telling them how brilliant it is and why they should do it. Because there's a naivety around what it is that they're coming into. So be aware, if you are that person, if you've got that hunger and you've got that desire and you really want to do it, you'll stick out and you'll succeed, whether it be within an organization like Adlib or you're your own person doing your own thing. But I think there are too many people who, no fault of their own, who are currently misguided about what the industry actually is. So they get to a point in it and go, well, I wasn't expecting that. And it's not fair. It's not right. There needs to be a greater level of honesty and integrity within education about the jobs. But first of all, they need to know what they are, which they currently don't. And I know that sounds harsh, but there's an amount of people in the city who are really respecting education, by the way. So it's not a banging of it, but there's too many youngsters that I talk to who will give testament to the statement that I've just made.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think to go back to your question, desire, passion, and persevere.
Yeah.
There's always an amount of time where you do something, or you tender for something, you don't get it, you go, and just about when you're about to give up, something lands.
Yeah, you're 2 feet from gold. What's that? Yeah, that proverb. Yeah.
And that's very prevalent in the installation side of our business, because obviously everything that we do isn't just the rental side. The biggest growth side we've had, again, was lockdown, building contractors on site. The only thing we could focus on was the few podcast gigs, if you like, and getting onto building sites and doing more and more work. So that team for us has grown massively because we could all focus on that department in lockdown. Yeah. So that department itself went from a 2 million turnover to now 10.
Right.
And we can't get enough people in that world. But that's everything from stage mechanics now. We've got like installs happening literally from the Olympia in London right the way through to the King's Theatre in Glasgow. And so there's like 3 or 4 big projects in London and 3 or 4 big projects in Glasgow at the minute. So again, that was one of the long-term pluses. We're still fighting the negatives. We had to take out 4 million in C-bills loans throughout that, and that's still being paid off. So there's a lot of debt that COVID caused that the industry still suffers from across the board. I can talk about venue owners in the city who are still paying debts.
Yeah, well, this is a big one. Yeah,
well, the small venues. I got an interesting stat through the other day. Small venues, I'll say 250 and below. The average net profit that they're running to is 0.2%, with the owner taking an average of 22 grand.
Oh my God.
That's why you're seeing so many small venues
close and crash and burn
on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
And that's where the industry needs to be throwing support at the minute.
Interesting. Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Andy Dockerty, thank you so much for being on the show, mate. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Come on, let's have a round of applause. Come on.
Cheers, guys. Yeah.